Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everybody, depending what time you happen to be listening to this. My name is Hubert O'Hearn, and you're listening to Thoughts, Comments, Opinions. A few months ago, as I record this in late August 2015, I read a remarkable memoir called Split, written by today's guest, Mary Dispenza. Mary has had an incredible, some ways tragic, but ending beautifully life. She was abused by a priest as a child. She went on to become a nun, an award-winning teacher, and then was, no other way to put it, kicked out of the church when she became an activist for lesbian, gay, and bisexual, transsexual causes. Looking forward to talking with her. I'm sure that you'll find Mary both informative and inspirational. So, sit back, relax, fire up a pontini, and listen to the words as they fly through the air. We'll be right back. Dispenza. Hello, Mary. How are you?
I'm just great, Hubert. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic. We had some technology issues, but here we are finally. So,
Me too.
yes. I've told the audience the basics of your story. I suppose really we should go back to the beginning of this remarkable memoir that you tell in Split. You were a little girl in Los Angeles and you were abused. Would you like to tell the audience what happened?
Yes, and I'd also like to add that, of course, at the time I dissociated myself from this entire reality. So this is like looking back at that time. I was 7, and I believe I probably fell into the priest's hands because my mom worked in the rectory, and it gave him an opportunity probably to do his grooming of sorts. And I was very accessible to him. And so one lunchtime, I was looking for my mom because she also helped in the rectory. And I went over to the rectory and they told me that my mom was in the lunchroom. So I ran over to the lunchroom to see her. And the lunchroom was connected to the auditorium. So I went in to visit my mom and the lunchroom ladies, and they were talking, and it wasn't very interesting to me. So I wandered into the auditorium. And the difference being that day it was very dark in there, and I wandered in and noticed that there was a movie beginning to start, and I wandered up the hallway and the center aisle of all the folding chairs on the right and the left, and the priest turned, noticed me coming in, and beckoned to me to come and watch the film. Anyway, that's what I thought his intentions were. And I crawled up on his lap because I already trusted him and had already learned that Father, in this case, Father Rucker, was the closest person to God on earth. And so I crawled up on his lap, and then he lifted my skirt and put his hands in under my panties and into me, and that's where I went blank, I believe. And I look back, and it's as if everything happened in slow motion. From that point on, the projector slowed, the picture stopped, and I have a sense that maybe 10, 15 minutes, I don't really know, life sort of stood still. And then he walked me to the back of the auditorium, left me. He went on his way. I recall going into the tiny little bathroom and washing my hands. And maybe in my own way, I thought that I was bad and dirty, and that was my way to cleanse. And then I left, went back to the ladies, including my mom, in the lunchroom, and buried that experience for half a lifetime.
Yeah, you refer in the book that you think that this may have happened more than once, but most definitely that
Yes,
time.
yes, exactly. I have two other flashbacks or recollections, but they're not they're not as vivid and as clear and as exact. But yes, I've decided I have to trust my own memory, and so I do have a strong feeling about two other times.
Yes. The and we'll get to when you face the predator decades later, actually. But the first remarkable thing to me about all this is that you were violated by a priest, and of course, I'm speaking to you from Ireland, and tragically, this is not uncommon here, but it didn't affect your faith to the point that you entered the convent. How were you able to disassociate the Catholic Church, which I was raised into, from what had happened to you?
Well, of course, that's why I called the book Split,
Yes.
because there truly was a split. It's as if I led two lives. Over here were the terrible experiences at the hands of the priest, and then over here was the church that I loved, and the very good sisters, good to me anyway. I know they have had their piece of abuse in history too, but for me, they were loving and kind. And I believe all of us kind of know what we need to do to survive and to carry on. And knew somehow I couldn't hold that peace, that terrible peace. So I just shifted psychologically, emotionally, spiritually over here to where God was. And I had learned as a little child that God loved me always, no matter what happened, in spite of anything, God loved me. And I believe for me, that was my survival piece. I went right to God. I could talk to God. I could tell God. God, in fact, God already knew what happened. So there was no shame with God. There was just an open avenue for me to access love. And and I don't know all the answers to that, but I chose God, I chose love, I chose it, I chose the good that I knew in my faith, and it sustained me. And I know other survivors who left God, who left the church as they tell their story. And in my story, I went to God because God had, at age 7, I already knew God loved me. And there was nothing that could take that love from me. And I needed it. And I just had to put the bad away in a box or something on a shelf. I'm not really sure, but there it stayed for over
And
half
that,
a
I think,
lifetime.
uh,
And I
yeah.
continued. Mhm.
No, I
Yes.
was just going to say that I think that that's one of the remarkable things about Split is that you really write it from a, a standpoint of emotional peace, even though you've had these huge disruptions, changes in your life that um, it's a very calming and positive message in the book. When did you first decide to move forward and report the abuse?
Well, I must say, even though I split and went toward God and lived a life that was full of meaning and purpose and service and dedication and a part of the Catholic Church, I always struggled, especially with intimacy. That was the area in which my life really took a great big bang, so to speak. And so I was always confused about sexuality and never quite able to have a significant, intimate relationship. Though I met men, and in one case, a 10-year relationship, it was always, something was always amiss. So that was a little bit of the price I paid. But it was in 1989 when I just felt I needed a job change from Catholic schools. I had been a teacher and a principal for 30 years by then, and ended that time frame with a National Distinguished Principal Award. And I only mentioned that because I thought, well, I've given so much here. I'd like perhaps to explore something else. And at that time, a position in the Pastoral Life Services Department of the Catholic Archdiocese opened up. And I thought, well, that's kind of a logical move. I know all about church history and community and faith, and I've participated myself in so many other things other than Catholic education that I applied for the position and I got it. I was appointed by Archbishop Hunshausen and Murphy as director of the Pastoral Life Services Department. And I remember at that time being asked by them, do you promise never to do anything that would cause the Archbishop's shame? And I said, of course. But as the story goes on, all of us at that particular year had to take a workshop on the sexual misconduct on the part of clergy, because that was a time when priest abuse and clergy abuse was kind of emerging. So the end of that day, and during that workshop, it was all of a sudden, I realized this happened to me. I'm one of these persons who were abused by a member of the clergy. That was the wake-up moment for me that brought me to wanting and realizing I needed to address this in my life. And it goes on and on. Shall I go on? Or shall I ask it?
One other question is that, and I've had a long-standing theory on it, but I'm interested in yours because obviously, pardon me, I'm looking at it from the outside. You were very much in the middle of it. Why do you think that it's the Catholic Church where this seems to happen so much, where members of, broadly stated, the ministry are predators?
Well, I have a lot of my own thoughts. I do believe a lot of men, priests, entered religious life when they were 13 and 14 years old. They were plucked, so to speak, out of the ordinary process of moving through their sexuality. So from my standpoint, it was arrested at age 14 for many of them. And partly, not always, but some of their engaging in sexual activity is is their way. They return to a 14-year-old and think they have a right, I guess, to put in those missing pieces. And then the second, I think it's a patriarchal model where men in the priesthood think that they have that they are above the laws that the rest of us are held accountable for, and even in sexuality. So they misuse their power and use it for their own advantage. They step out of their vows, especially celibacy, and kind of live in a out of touch with reality and believing they have the right or power to abuse and misuse for their own gain and their own satisfaction. And then there's this systemic dysfunction of the priesthood, which keeps secrets for each other, protects each other, and doesn't tell on the other, because oftentimes they're all implicit, complicit in this whole problem of sexual abuse of children and adults in the priesthood.
Remind me when you left the sisterhood, because it's been a while since I read your book. What? How old were you when you left being a practicing nun?
I was 33.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so you're working for the diocese, and you choose to bring the charges over, and one of the wonderful figures in your book is the assistant DA who decides to move forward with the case. You got anything but support from the archdiocese that, and you referred to the clause in your contract, to not bring shame or embarrassment on the archbishop.
Mm-hmm.
Tell the audience what happened when when that happened, about the lack of support you received, and also this leads into your activism as well.
Well, yes, Hubert, my story has another piece to it, which is as I'm directing the Pastoral Life Services Department, and after that workshop, I took part in a group of women who realized they too had been abused, or maybe already knew, but we all ended up in a support group at something called TARA, which was a therapy and renewal group connected to the Archdiocese. And in that group, that's when I began to tell my story of having been abused as a child. And what happened within that same year, I acknowledged that my way of loving in the world was best served in loving a woman. And I believe that I had to tell that truth first.
Sure.
To tell another truth. It's sort of like I have come to believe that as we tell one truth, we gain the strength and courage to tell another truth about our lives. And it was in therapy when my therapist said to me, unless you deal with the issue of sexuality in your life, because I didn't want to talk about women. I just wanted to be heterosexual because that's what my church told me I needed to be, and that's what my church honored and recognized. And so I didn't even want to talk about it. But this one day came when she said to me, unless you deal with your issue of sexuality, you will never know intimacy. And as I mentioned, I craved intimacy. I wanted an intimate connection in my life. And so I went home that day from therapy and I just sat with that question and finally just said, yes, I do love women. And all of my life up to that point, I I struggled with men and women. I would have a woman in my life, and I would get guilty because of the Catholic Church, and then I would say, "This can't be." I'd leave that. Then I'd try really hard to be heterosexual. I'd meet men in my life, and things would work well, except that intimate sexual piece. And I did that for half a lifetime too, and it was terribly, terribly exhausting, as it is when we don't live in alignment with who we are. And so in that therapy session, that the next week I went back and said, yes, this is who I am. And she, being connected with the church, I remember her putting her head down. And it wasn't like, oh my God, this is a terrible thing, but it was more her response to knowing what that would mean to me.
Consequences, yes. Mm-hmm.
And so I was excited. I was naive and excited. I thought the church and those my colleagues and the Archbishop, that everyone would really be happy because finally I found myself, and that's what they taught me all my life.
You must have felt so free, like windows and doors had been opened. That you were able to be yourself and feeling joy. And doesn't everybody feel joy with me? And they don't.
They did not.
Yeah.
And so I went back to my department and started telling some close friends. I tried really hard to see the Archbishop because I wanted to tell him. And he, of course, had said, anytime one of you who are directors needs to see me, I'll be there for you. But he wouldn't see me. And I can only conclude that he had already maybe some rumors or someone in my department told him to alert him. I don't really know, but in a couple of months I was fired. And that's the shame I brought. It wasn't about the abuse, because that was a different diocese. And it was about coming out, ending up in an article in the Seattle Times, because one of the things I felt compelled to do was to learn about the LGBT community, because I knew now this is my community. At that time, I thought I knew nothing about gay, and I thought that I didn't know a gay person, as we all often do. But I noticed there was a class at the University of Washington called Around Lesbian and Gay Studies, and I took that class, and at the end of it, a reporter from the Seattle Times came to do an article because they thought it was new and novel. And I was hanging around to get my paper approved, and she approached me, asked me a couple of questions, and then said, could I set up an interview with you? And I said, sure. So it ends up being in my office, upstairs, downstairs beneath the Archbishop's office. And in that article, she asked me, what does the Catholic Church think about homosexuality? And I said, well, the Church teaches us that we can be who we are but not live that out. And then I could have put a period, but I added, I don't believe God will gives us our different sexualities. That I believe God gives us our different sexualities, and the greatest gift we can return the giver is to live those out. Well, those were the lines that I think were the ones that really embarrassed the Archbishop, because basically in that statement it was implied that I would live out my life now. I had no plan, but I knew I had to live now from a place of truth.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. One thing I'm curious about. Do you still consider yourself to be a Catholic?
No.
Yeah.
And it took me probably up to just last year to really say with conviction, I am not a Catholic. That's how hard it's been to let go of my connection. Before that, I would say, no, well, this would be a qualified, but now it's like, no, I'm not. And that's a great loss. It's a loss for the Catholic Church, and it's a loss for me.
Well put.
We both lost each other.
So then, you decide to write the book, and you have to relive the abuse and facing Father Rucker in the proceedings, etc., etc. And in writing a book, you have to relive everything. How hard was it to write Split?
Well, certain pieces were very difficult to write. However, it was a very good thing for me to try to put words with so many experiences where I had no words. I had no words or feelings. So the book gave me words, and I think I felt gave little Mary a voice, where she did a lot of speaking in the book. And that's what I had to trust too, that she has something to say and she's saying it. So there was a little bit of there was a coming together of of both of us in a new and a different way. And I learned different things too from writing. For example, I never really knew why I left the convent. I knew I wasn't going towards something. For example, many religious leave because they want to go towards something. They might want to marry, they might want to have children, they're going towards something. I only knew that something inside of me was not peaceful, was fragmented. And that could have been not just religious life, but my own life. But in any event, in writing the book, I realized that religious life for me, it just wasn't enough. It wasn't enough life for me. It wasn't enough love. It wasn't enough. It didn't provide me with enough experiences to live my gifts and my talents. And I'm only speaking for me because I have great friends, dear women friends in religious life, and they have found it to be enough for them, and then some. So I'm just speaking for myself.
Of course. Have you heard from other survivors?
Yes.
From other
I'm a
women
part
who
of SNAP.
have been abused. What sort of feedback have you received from the book?
Well, I would just like to say I'm called the Northwest Director for SNAP, Survivors Network of Those Abused by Priests, and that's brought connecting to SNAP has also brought many survivors into my life. But the thing that I'm most upset about, perhaps, is the brokenness of many of the survivors I've met. They are still putting their lives back together. experiencing serious consequences psychologically, emotionally, and spiritually. Their spirituality has been deeply harmed because those they trusted, such as the priest, betrayed them. And so that brokenness, it really is upsetting when I I experienced that in my friends, and many are very angry and bitter with the Catholic Church, with the bishops, the popes, because many of us have had a priest who molested us and was passed on and on and on. I'm not the only one, but I'm an example. I was 7, and the particular priest in my case, that was 1947. He was not defrocked until I think it was 2002, and not because of children, but because he was becoming a significant liability to the Church of Archdiocese of Los Angeles. So many of my friends who are survivors are very angry that the priests were passed on and able to hurt other children.
The church changes with all the speed of a glacier turning. We finally got around to acknowledging that the sun is at the center of the solar system and so forth. But do you think Pope Francis has made some accommodating sounds? Do you think that the church will ever come to accept alternate sexuality?
No,
Yeah.
not at all. I said that quite quickly, didn't I?
That's perfectly all right.
I don't. Uh, I don't think the church, the Pope, who says wonderful things like "Who am I to judge?" And the truth is, he does judge because, as the representative of the Catholic Church, he deems same-sex relationships as not valid, as not worthy of blessing or marriage or the adoption of children. The church, deems women not worthy of the priesthood. He deems at this point Catholics who have divorced and remarried not worthy of receiving the Eucharist.
Right.
And I don't think those that I've mentioned will change, at least not in the near future. And the church does not believe that priests can marry and still be extremely effective in their ministry and their work. I just don't believe those principles, whatever we want to call them, that the Catholic Church thinks is central, will change for a very, very, very long time. And I believe it's like a wall, a brick wall, that if you pull out one thing, they are afraid it's going to crumble, which is not the truth.
Oh, I know it. Last portion, Mary, and what I refer to as advertisements for myself. How can people get a hold of Split? Any organizations that you'd like to mention for people having help? And I'll look up the URLs, and I'll include them in the written write-up that will go with our interview.
Mm-hmm. Well, I encourage people to read my book and be most grateful if they did, and if they like it, to write a comment on Amazon. However, my book is available through Kindle, Kobo, Amazon, and in some bookstores.
Fantastic.
And it's called Split: A Child, a Priest, and the Catholic Church. And it just got a honor as a semi-finalist in the Kindle Book Award.
Well done, you. I didn't know
I
that. Because it
know,
is
it's
a
a
wonderful,
little
wonderful
dry.
book, and it's taken us ages to get this interview sorted, but when I read it, I thought, what, first remarkable story, bravely told, but also brilliantly written. You are a wonderful writer, Mary. You truly are.
Well, thanks. I mean, well, thank you. Then, it just for you, perhaps. I finally caved in to getting a Kirkus book review just because I have yours, which I call a credible book review, but I just needed it. But the good news is it was good. The
Well,
Kirkus review was good.
the reviewer then
So that,
was not blind, because no,
because
it's quality stuff.
they tell you if it isn't, you don't have to use. And then, please, anyone who's struggling with abuse, especially clergy abuse or any, please explore SNAP. Snapnetwork.org
Okay.
is where our website can be reached, snapnetwork.org. If anyone ever wants to communicate with me, if there's any support or encouragement I can give them, would you want my I have a website. It's called marydispenza.net, no, .com, marydispenza.com. That would be a way they could contact me.
Wonderful. Mary, you're a true angel for what you've done, and I thoroughly admire you. Thank you ever so much for doing thoughts, comments, and opinions.
Well, Hubert, I admire you too. I've since visited your sites and they're very impressive and you're doing good work.
Oh, bless your heart. Cheers, Mary. I'd like to thank once again Mary Dispenza for being our guest on Thoughts, Comments, Opinions. Coming up on tomorrow's show, we have a quite different topic. Charlotte Angel, the ASMR Angel, talking about the ASMR response, the tingling sensation that people receive when they listen to whispering, crinkling paper, that sort of thing. That is an interview I'm truly looking forward to. In the meantime, please come and visit our Patreon page where I keep a full archive of all of our interviews. Visit us on Hispanic News Online or on San Diego Book Review. And until next time, from all of us in Ireland who work the late shift, good night, everybody, and be seeing you.